So hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So I often say in my videos that making mistakes is pretty good really, because it means that you're being creative and you're pushing yourself. So instead of just preaching that, I thought I'd show you an example of me messing up. So I'll show you in stages how I progress through this drawing and at what point I decide that I maybe shouldn't have used a material that I chose. So this is going to be my usual sort of line and wash technique using some watercolour, but there is a slight difference today in the fact that I'm using a Manon Sailor Fude pen. This is just a fountain pen with a bent nib, but when you use it on rough paper it gives you quite an interesting texture to your line work. So the initial part of this drawing is to lay it out in pencil. Now, often as you've seen in some of my videos, I tend to work straight in pen because I like the spontaneity that it tends to give the artwork. The reason why I've chosen to actually use pencil here is because there is a little bit of complexity in the perspective. Fortunately, it's primarily one-point perspective with a little bit more going on in the columns, but I basically laid it out with my mechanical pencil there. The reason why I was attracted to draw this scene is I was really quite intrigued by the way that the archway framed the whole image. As you can see from the reference drawing, there's a lot of contrast in this image as well. There's a lot of darkness in the foreground and a lot of shadow under that archway. So after I've sketched in the foreground those four main columns that form that arch, I'm going into that background area and I'm just putting in those window details there. So before I do the line work for this drawing, I'm exercising my fountain pens. Now I know this sounds a bit weird, but the problem with fountain pens is if they're not used at least once every couple of weeks, they do tend to bung up and then they take you a long time to clear out. So what I do occasionally when I sit down to do a drawing, if I haven't put pen to paper for a while, I'll get all my fountain pens out and give them a little walk around the page just to try and get a little bit of that ink flowing through them. So this one is a Opus 88 fountain pen with a flex nib that I fitted to it, and as you can see it's not playing the game here, so I'm trying to actually get it to flow properly. You can see how that flex nib works. So next I've got the Manon Sailor pen with the bent nib. This is a really fun pen to sketch with and I'll be using that for today's sketch. This pen is a parallel pen and I've modified the nib on that one to give you a different sort of line quality. It's one of my favourite pens and I'm doing a video on that coming up soon. And here we have another flex nib pen. This is a Noodler's Ahab flex nib and I've modified the feed on this so it's a really wet one. It's great fun to sketch with. It is a little bit messy and it does occasionally burp onto the page, so you can't be too fussy when you're using it. As you can see, it tends to over ink itself a little bit, but it's got a wonderful flex nib on it which is great for expressive line work. So I'm starting to ink this in now with the Fude pen, the Manon Sailor pen. This is a 55 degrees one, I think. You can get them in different configurations, 45 or 55 degrees. As you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm running the nib over the rough paper, and because the nib has a flat section it tends to sort of pick up the texture of the paper and you get these really interesting line effects. Because the nib is quite thick as well, if you angle it in the right way the nib will create a thick line, but if you stand the pen up on its end so it's more vertical or you flip the pen over, what you tend to get is these thinner lines. So you do have quite a lot of control with this pen. Now one of the decisions I've made pretty early on in this drawing is adding cross-hatching into the bottom of those columns, and in some ways that affects how the rest of the drawing progresses, because what you're doing straight away is you're putting in some very dark values. So by doing that you're already dictating what is going to be a dark part of the picture. So the next thing I do here, which I'm really not sure about, is I decided to actually ink in the columns. Now there is a lot of reasons why you should never really use black in these kind of drawings, and it's because really what you're effectively doing is creating a bit of a hole in the drawing. Even in some of the darkest shadows that we see in our environment, rarely do you see true black. And also when you see very dark areas you still have the opportunity to put some interesting colours or textures or something within that darker space that can help tell the story of what's going on there. Now this drawing was done very much from the off with no kind of plan in mind really. Often if you're going to be doing a drawing, if it was something was quite important to you, or if it was a commission or something like that, or you were doing a drawing for a friend, you know, I would recommend sometimes doing some small thumbnail sketches and plan it out, and, you know, plan out some of those basic decisions, you know, maybe some of the materials you're going to use, or how big it's going to be, you know. But this drawing was very much a freestyle one, you know, where I just sat down to play around, really. Now, because I've made the decision to actually make those columns at the back, the darker columns, completely black, what that means is now I have to actually make the ones at the front pretty dark as well, because they're not that much lighter, if you know what I mean. I mean, obviously not as you get further down, where there's a lot more light on them from that overhang, but certainly at the top. So we're already going down a route here of pretty much monochrome. It's looking very black and it's looking very white. And straight away that's going to sort of skew the values of the overall piece in a way. But what I've decided to do here is to actually, you know, double down on it and go the whole hog. So I've got myself an old brush. I don't know why this one is quite so beaten up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go the whole hog and put the whole top of the drawing in with black. So this is platinum carbon black ink, and I'm just using it neat, and it's just going straight on there. Now this is definitely a point of no return here, and we'll see how it turns out. I'm really not sure how this is going to go, but the dog doesn't seem too stressed, so that's the main thing. So as you can see in the background there, we've gone full on black ink, and I'm using this mop brush here. I'm going to start applying some colour. Now straight away here you've got a pretty uphill battle, because to match the contrast with the black and white that I've used here, you're going to need some pretty punchy colours. Now there's other ways of doing it. You could just tint it with some really subtle colours. That might work quite well. You could choose a single colour, like just a nice blue, and use that to add some texture and some details into the drawing, and then it gives you not necessarily a black and white drawing, but some simple sort of single colour features. And that could work quite well. Obviously I've missed a little bit of my recording there. So what I've decided to go in and almost paint it in. So what I'm doing here is I'm starting with some of the shadow areas. Again, it's a bit of a weird way of doing it. And I'm adding in some moon glow and a little bit of blue. What I'm trying to effectively do here is gradient the black out. I'm looking at the reference drawing and just seeing really how can I deal with that black, even though I've actually put it in. Now I've chosen to put that black in, and straight away I'm trying to almost diffuse it, you know, trying to add shadow detail. It's a very odd way of working this. I'm not quite sure why I went that way. So as I build up a little bit of the watercolour on the right hand side, there's a lovely colour pop on there. It's like a bright orange, and I think I'm using transparent Pyrrole orange, which is a Daniel Smith colour, and I'm adding in that lovely orange on the right hand side. Again, I'm using a small mop brush here, which is quite a nice way of applying paint quite quickly and reasonably accurately, but it does tend to hold a lot of paint, so you can cover reasonable areas quite fast. And since this drawing is roughly about A4, it's pretty much a one-stop shop really for this kind of urban sketching. So as that's been dried off now, I've used the hairdryer, and that orange is faded back a little bit. It's not quite so potent as it was. I'm starting to work on some of the detail in the foreground, you know, some of these beautiful old paving stones that are a little bit cracked and bashed about. So I'm splashing a bit of paint on those. So I'm using the texture of the paper there and a slight dry brush technique to try and add in some nice texture on the paving stones. Actually, I should better get it done, yeah. So the last bit of the drawing at the back there is I'm using a little bit of quinacridone gold and a bit of Pyrrole orange, and just putting a colour pop at the back of the picture, and I think that's quite nice. It leads your eye through that archway towards the back of the square there. Final touches on this drawing are going to be just filling in those windows black, and then I'm going to be adding in some window frames there with the white gel pen, which I'm not 100% sure whether strictly is accurate, but it's just a nice quick way of capturing that window frame detail. Is you add in the black first and then use the gel pen to add in the frames afterwards. So as we wrap that up, I can talk a little bit about some of the decisions I made there. Now you can see how, first of all, one of the things I've learned from this is watercolour will not sit on the top of platinum carbon black ink. Platinum carbon black ink is like an Indian ink, so it's carbon particle based, and it actually is so intense that when it dries it creates a sheen. Now that sheen is slightly reflective, so you can see here once you add watercolour on top of that, it creates this dull area and it just looks awful. So not only do those textures not really work well together as materials, they don't really function very well together. It may be that you can put the ink over the watercolour, but you certainly can't put the watercolour over the ink. So that's not good in a sense. But I think the main thing about this drawing that I learned is going straight in with those black values is just not the way to do it. I think if I was actually doing a monochrome drawing, so I was just using cross-hatching or just using black and white, using black and white in one single colour, it might have worked differently. But it's just too heavy-handed. I think black is one of those colours that you have to think really carefully about before you use it in art. Now, I'll show you a couple of examples here where I've used it really effectively for skies. And I've done plenty of drawings in the past where I've used black for backgrounds, and it really helps the white, the highlights really pop. So there's definitely a place for it, but I think in something like this kind of urban sketch, you have to be pretty careful before you use it. So I hope you get something from that, and I hope you understood why I actually wanted to use this in the end. I mean, I hate to leave anything sitting on the cutting room floor, but it's also, if there's a little lesson in, someone gets something from it, that's great. I mean, somebody might see this and think, that's wonderful, I really want to use that technique, and then, that's brilliant. But for me, I don't think I'll necessarily be working this way again. So best of luck to you, make loads of mistakes, just enjoy it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.